Hello. How is everyone doing tonight? Now, tonight I'm streaming with StreamYard. I am using StreamYard. I don't normally do this. I normally stream from my phone. But given the current situation with YouTube and everything going on there, I thought I might try to stream with StreamYard. So that's what I'm doing for tonight. So welcome, everybody. Glad to be here. Glad that you're here as always. Welcome, welcome, welcome. Be sure to hit the like button. Be sure to hit the subscribe button. Be sure to hit the notifications bell. We are here despite the best efforts of our detractors. We are not going anywhere. I've got plenty of unnamed diet beverage. I'm pouring the unnamed diet beverage. It's a little bit different to be staring at my computer screen rather than staring at my iPhone, but that's okay. That's all good. Hit the like button, hit the subscribe button, hit the notifications bell. All right, so the way we do things here is that I give my opening remarks, and then from there, after I give my opening remarks, then we do our roll call, where I call you out as I see you, names and locations. And then after I call you out as I see you, names and locations, at that point, then I answer your super chat questions for the rest of the night. Then we're done. And that's how things seem to work. So I wish you all a happy Wednesday, or no, today's Tuesday. I wish you all a happy Tuesday evening. With no further ado, I guess we will get down to business. Now, the reason that there's been a little bit of a shakeup here is because I am unable to upload videos to YouTube at this time. Every time I upload a video, since Sunday, every time I upload a video, it says processing will begin shortly and does not upload. I have confronted the Google creator support about this, and they say that my videos are now subject to manual review. I don't know what that means. I guess it means that their internal team has to manually look at my videos before they can go up. Well, they haven't done it yet. I deleted and then re-uploaded. Videos have been waiting. So I don't know when they're going to manually look at my videos. Now, keep in mind, I don't have any strikes. I have never had a strike. I am not in violation of the policies at all. But now they want to manually review my videos. Now, I don't know if this is going to be every video. I asked them at one point in the exchange. I asked them, I said, should I expect this with every video from here forward? And they said yes. So they're not really giving me information. I don't know why my videos are being held and subject to manual review. I don't know why I have to wait for some techie in Silicon Valley to look at my videos before they get uploaded. That's the situation we're in. However, because I'm in good standing and because I am a partner, I am able to stream. So here I am streaming, and at the moment, there has not been any infringing on my ability to stream. So I'm here streaming with all of you. I am here streaming with all of you. Yeah, that's what I'm doing. So there you go. Lots of leftists seem to hate suburbs and say they shouldn't exist due to racist origins. What is your position on the suburbs? Leftists hate suburbs. Racist. Your position. All righty. And wrote it down. Thank you for the super chat. Much appreciated, good sir. So here I am. That's kind of our situation. So we're continuing. We're not going anywhere. We're going to keep streaming. I'm here streaming. I'm using StreamYard. To stream. Worst traitor to communism. Alrighty. using StreamYard to stream, and I'm going to stay on YouTube as long as I possibly can, because this is access to a bigger audience, to a much bigger audience here on YouTube. If we leave YouTube, our audience is going to be limited, right? Maybe I'll start dual, doing like right now. We're also streaming on Facebook right now. On Facebook, people are watching, right? Because I'm using StreamYard. So there you go. There you go. So, here we are. I don't know if people are aware of what's going on in the world, but tomorrow there is supposed to be the high-level meeting between Russian President Vladimir Putin and U.S. President Joe Biden. And there's quite a bit of anticipation of that high-level meeting that is set to take place in Geneva. People are looking at that meeting. Great amount of anticipation. They'll apparently be discussing issues related to nuclear proliferation. That's a pretty intense situation that is happening. I think a lot of people are nervous to see how that meeting goes. A lot of people in many countries around the world, because the future of humanity hangs in the balance. I mean, nuclear war is not a good thing. It's never a good thing. Never is nuclear war a good thing. Biden took office on a platform of saying that Trump was soft on Putin. It was Putin's puppet. And, Biden took office on a platform of being this anti-Russian extremist. Christianity and imperialism. And that doesn't seem to indicate that there would be a good meeting. But let's not forget that Richard Nixon took office on a platform of being an extreme anti-communist, of cracking down on the peace movement, cracking down on the Black liberation struggle. And you'll notice that Nixon then met with Mao and recognized China, because Nixon was able to do it. Any other president would have been called a communist and a traitor. It's their thoughts on IRA in comparison. IRA in comparison to Naxals. All righty. So there you go. Just going through here. All right. Getting used to the new system. Right. We're doing StreamYard for this stream rather than other methods. So I can scroll up in the chat. Wow, look at that. I can scroll up and scroll back down once I'm done scrolling up. Wow. There you go. There you go. Looking at this. Sorry, this is a little bit of an unorthodox stream. I haven't used StreamYard before. I suppose I could have prepared clips and shown them to you, because that's the way we're doing it. But yes, we're here. We're not going anywhere. Shout out to Comrade Natalie for that very lovely thumbnail that we are using. Tremendous thumbnail. That is great. That is going to be awesome. It's a tremendous thumbnail. So thank you very much for that. And there you go. All righty. And now I'm scrolling back down to the bottom of the chat. So there you go. So people are nervous in anticipation of that meeting. People are looking at the economy in the United States. There's a lot of fears at this point. What do we got? Thoughts regarding specific economic zones of China. Right. Economic in China. But yeah, went to the gym today, exercised. That was tremendous. Change was tremendous. Able to exercise, stay on top of things. That was kind of a good feeling. And, heading into the summit tomorrow, we're just going to have to see what happens in Geneva. See what Biden has to say, see what Putin has to say. And that's really all that we can do. Now, as far as the situation with China, As far as the situation with China, you know, the Tibet separatists are making noise. The Taiwan separatists are making noise. There is an escalation of demonization of China. There's the whole allegation that somehow we should blame China for the global COVID situation. There's an attempt to scapegoat China as being responsible. That's certainly very intense. And there I go. What's going on here? I went away and then I came back and here I am. There you go. It's also worth mentioning the BreadTube book. I have in fact finished the BreadTube book. I've gone over it a number of times. I hate working on the BreadTube book, okay? I really don't like writing the BreadTube book. It was not fun for me, right? You know, most of the book, the bulk of the book is political. It is arguments against this illusion that there should be a limit to growth. It's arguments against this belief that that Marx was not a statist, that Marx somehow didn't believe in having a proletarian state. It's arguments against this idea that capitalism is just pencil factories and that it's not imperialism and that we don't need a centrally planned economy. The book is generally, you know, I get into quite a bit of important stuff. I talk into the confused anti-fascism of the BreadTube universe. They don't understand what fascism means. And they, in the name of anti-fascism, they're just anti-populist and anti-working class. And that they've taken on a lot of the teachings of Theodore Adorno, Susan Sontag, and others. And in the name of anti-fascism, they have become deeply problematic. So that's a big part of the book. Look, it is shocking to me. Okay, I mean, as I'm putting this book together, I just don't get it. It really just shows you how rigged social media really is and how much Orwellian thought control and manipulation of the public there is. Look, in one of his videos, or their videos, Skippy the Bear, you know, who goes by the internet moniker, you know, Thought Slime. We don't want to say Skippy's name. We just call him Skippy the Bear. But Skippy the Bear says in one of his video streams that democratic centralism is an economic mode of production. Right? So Skippy the Bear is making a video and he's trying to explain what socialism is. And of course, he thinks socialism is just a bunch of independent worker cooperatives competing with each other and functioning according to the profit motive. Couldn't possibly be what they had in the Soviet Union. Couldn't possibly be what they have in China. Couldn't possibly be what they have in Cuba. Oh, no, no. Socialism is this idea that's totally compatible with capitalism. It's just every business is a co-op. And in his video, he's got to explain what, you know, a centrally planned economy is. So he says, well, a centrally planned economy is this thing that that Lenin made up, and it's called democratic centralism. And you see that and you just think, like, that is so ignorant. You know, democratic centralism was the political organizational methods of the Bolshevik Party. Okay, democratic centralism has nothing to do with centrally planned economies, has nothing to do with 5-year economic plans. I wrote it down. Nothing to do with that. And he sits there and he says, well, actually, this idea that we should have a centrally planned economy was invented by Lenin. It's called democratic centralism. And you hear that and you just think, like, this individual does not know anything about Marxism. Canadian. Mining. You know, this person doesn't know anything about Marxism. I mean, the party of new type, democratic centralism, the Bolshevik organizing methods, these have not, I mean, that's not the same as having a centrally planned economy. One is a political organizing method used by the Bolsheviks to overthrow capitalism. The other is an economic form. And the fact that he does not know what a basic Marxist-Leninist concept like democratic centralism means. And in his ignorance would make a statement like this, makes you wonder, how on earth did this individual become the spokesperson for Marxism and socialism on the internet? Another great example, Vosh, in his rants, he often will quote Marx saying, you know, the Paris Communards showed that the working class cannot take hold of the ready-made state machinery, it must smash it, that's a legit quote from Marx. But he uses that quote to say that Marx did not advocate creating a proletarian state. That's ridiculous. It comes from Karl Marx's lecture, his presentation, The Civil War in France, about the Paris Commune. And he spends the entire next paragraph, the entire next like 3 or 4 pages, going into great detail about how the Paris Communards broke apart the capitalist state of France, of Paris, and built new institutions, built new state institutions, new parliaments, new militias, and praising those parliaments and militias. So either Vosh has just never read The Civil War in France, has no clue what Marx actually argued, but somebody just handed him a quote, or he's consciously lying, right? But the idea that that quote somehow means that, you know, Marx did not advocate there ever being a proletarian state is just ridiculous. I mean, it's just downright ridiculous. And again, right, if you've ever read anything that Marx writes about the Paris Commune, he's writing about how great it is that they broke apart the capitalist state and created new institutions of workers' power. And so you have to wonder, like, how do people lie this badly, right? What's up? Trump. Downfall. USSR. And Kwame Nkrumah. All right. $4.99. All righty. And so this is just the situation. I mean, we've got people who they don't know what they're talking about, but more than not knowing what they're talking about, they're being like, you know, you watch, there's a stream that, you know, a couple months back, Vosh did a stream where he was trying to convince his viewers to vote for Joe Biden. A lot of streams like that, right? And Vosh is on there trying to convince his viewers to vote for Joe Biden. And he's got a bunch of quotations from Marx and from Lenin and from Mao to convince everybody to vote for Joe Biden. You listen to these quotes, it becomes pretty clear he doesn't know what he's talking about. I mean, the quotes don't even mean what he says they mean. He does not understand the contexts of the quotes. And thank you, Failure First. Much appreciated, right? They haven't shut me down. I'm still here streaming, right? As long as I can still stream, I'm here. He doesn't understand the context of the quotes. He's just, you know, rambling off. And, you know, Hakeem did a video, you know, debunking this and how just embarrassing it is. Vosh didn't assemble this list of quotes. Somebody assembled it for him. But the people who assembled it for him are quite embarrassing also. I mean, the BreadTube universe is particularly cringe. I mean, and I've spent more time thinking about BreadTube than I ever want to spend, really. I mean, I really don't want to think about BreadTube very much anymore. I'm pretty sick of thinking about BreadTube. They're just infuriating, honestly. It's infuriating. You know, ContraPoints has that video, you know, where it's, you know, how to spot a fascist. And of course they say they're not a fascist. I am not a fascist is exactly what a fascist would say, says ContraPoints. You watch the video, anything could be fascist, according to that video. A hand gesture, a phrase. But for some reason, you know, this "you're a secret fascist" stuff never applies to Joe Biden, right? How many racial gaffes has Joe Biden made? But no, he's not a fascist. How many inappropriate actions has Joe Biden engaged? You know, but everybody knows Joe Biden's not a fascist because he's the status quo. You know, and you watch the video, ContraPoints herself clearly must be a fascist because in her video, she quotes fascists and far-right people. In her video, she wears a fascist-like uniform. And according to her video, of course, it's an anti-fascist video, but that doesn't matter. See, they disavow it. According to ContraPoint's own video, she herself must be a fascist. Belarus original model. Wrote it down. You know, I mean, it's just it's quite ridiculous. I mean, she herself must be a fascist. You know, so there you go. Now, Ricky Rousseau is a crypto-fascist Maupinoid from the CPUSA. Great to meet you, Rick. Yeah, I saw that somebody put out on the internet that there are a number of crypto-fascist Maupinoids in the Communist Party USA. I have never met a crypto-fascist Maupinoid in my life. Never have I met anyone who is a crypto-fascist Maupinoid. I don't even know what a crypto-fascist Maupinoid is. But if you know anybody who is a crypto-fascist Maupinoid in the Communist Party of the United States, by all means, introduce me. I would really, really like to meet them. Really, really would love to meet such a person. But, you know, a lot of exciting stuff is in the works, right? There's going to be some pretty good talks that go up on the web probably in early July. There's going to be a gathering at some point, and that's going to be pretty neat. You know, I'm kind of stressing out as I figure out what's going on with that, because, you know, with the circumstances, it's not like, you know, you just, you know, so that's going to be important. Very, very good, you know, kind of talks coming up. You know, I'm going to see some people I haven't seen in a while and meet some new people, and that's going to be good. So fingers crossed that all goes well. Yeah. And, the weather seems to be quite erratic, folks. I'll say that much. You know, I am not one, as much as I might be skeptical about the intentions of some of the voices promoting climate change. I am not I can't say climate change isn't a reality, because I mean the weather is so irrational. You know, and I mean it seems apparent to me that there is some impact on the climate. You know, I mean it's pretty clear there's impact on the climate from humans. I mean that's very, very clear. As much as I don't particularly like the idea that growth is bad, which is what a lot of the voices promoting climate change push, I think climate change is a reality. I think it is. And I mean, we can talk about that. That was one of the super chat questions. We can talk about that. But yeah, I just, you know, I look at the situation, and there you go. Wow. I mean, yeah, I had a great chat with Ramiro on Monday, and that video is one of the ones that YouTube is holding off. And I had a great chat with Dust James over the weekend, and that is one of the videos that's being held off. So go to Dust James' channel, watch it there. Go to Ramiro's channel, watch it there. And hopefully YouTube starts letting my videos through. What can I say? What can I say? I mean, you know, it's just, we shall see. They haven't stopped me from streaming. So here I am. And this is a new format using what do you call it? Using StreamYard. So that's how we're doing things. And this is a little bit off tonight. This is kind of a test stream, if you will. Kind of like last night. I wanted to make sure I could still stream. This is a little bit of a test stream. I'm not on here giving a big speech. I'm telling you about the BreadTube book. I'm telling you about YouTube and how unhelpful they've been. This is kind of a test stream, but it seems to be going okay. A lot of you are here. So like I said, hit the like button, hit the subscribe button, hit the notifications bell. And I really don't have that much to say tonight, other than, you know, letting you all know about the BreadTube book, letting you know about the meeting and tomorrow, Geneva. That's going to be big. The rising Chinophobia, the need to push back against all of that is definitely something that we all need to be focused on. And since I don't really have a big prepared speech for tonight's opening remarks, I guess on that note, we can just do the roll call. I'll call you out names and locations. I'll call you out as I see you. Names and locations. I'll call you out as I see you. And then from there, I'll answer your super chat questions. And that'll be tonight's stream. It'll be a shorter stream than usual. We got Kendall in San Diego. Rafael in Brazil. Welcome, Rafael. Welcome, welcome, welcome. We've got Ryan in Oakland. Zach in Mississippi. JT24 in Mississippi. Zach in Seattle. Jenny Lynn in Cincinnati, Ohio. Ishmael in Los Angeles. Meredith and Quinn from Eatonville. Very, very, very good. Patrick from Los Angeles. Whoa, I got to scroll up because they're all coming in, right? All right. Meredith and Quinn from Eatonville, Washington. Jason Sarna in Vallejo, California. Glendale, California, Holly in Queens, New York, Tennessee, Patrick from Los Angeles, Daniel from Southern California, Marching Orders, there you go, Northern California, Juan from Mexico, Memphis, Tennessee. Who else is with us tonight? Just scrolling up because they're coming in. Again, I'm figuring out how to use this new program. South Island of New Zealand, Nashville. Elena from Toronto is with us. Chicago. John from Houston. Kansas City, Missouri. Thomas. Kieran from San Diego. Southern Indiana. Auckland, New Zealand. Mo from Toronto. David Fox, good friend of the program, from Bendigo, Australia. We got Keel Jones, the Maupinoid from North Carolina. We got so-called New Jersey, mass casualty. We've got Mo in Pomona, California. We've got Marcus in Asheville. We've got Calvin from Saskatoon. All right, and I'm strolling back up. Right, don't want to miss anybody. Right, we've got Calvin from Saskatoon, Ben from Hungary, Elena from Toronto, Pennsylvania, Michael in Ithaca, New York, good friend of the show, Calgary in Alberta. We've got Tamara and Dario from Brooklyn, good longtime friends here. Jeff from Studio City, California. We got Tristan in Maryland is with us tonight. Welcome, Tristan. We got Nate from Maupinoid, Australia. We got Mohsen from Iran. We got Max from Boston. We got Denton in Manhattan. We got Arturo in Anchorage, Alaska. We got Gus James, Anti-Imperialist America, North Carolina. Welcome. We got UWS in New York. Julian from Texas. Steve from Southwest Michigan. Sarajevo in Bosnia. We got, got to shoot back up again. All right, we've got Julian from Texas. We got Romania. Hello, Caleb from Lisbon. Very good. Clydebank, Ontario. Thank you. Hawaii, West Virginia. Robert Webb from Hawaii. Kyle Jones. Lick from Paris, France. Leipzig, East Germany. What's up, Caleb? It's Mike Martinez in Miami. Good longtime friend of the show, Mike Martinez. Welcome, Mike. Kashik from Kolkata, India. David in China is with us. Cold Lake, Canada. Very good. Natalie from Maryland, good friend of the program. And thank you for your lovely, lovely thumbnail that we're using for tonight's broadcast, as unorthodox as it may be. And that's the broadcast that's unorthodox, not your graphic. Love your graphic. Zephyr from Eugene, Oregon. Very, very good. Very, very good. Arthur Porter, good friend out in Arizona, is with us. Welcome, Arthur. So glad that you are here. We've got someone from Russland. I don't know where Russland is, but you are very welcome in Russland. Very, very good, right? Glad to call people out as I see them. We're experimenting tonight, doing the live from StreamYard rather than from the phone. The video is probably not as high quality, but there are some features that are good. I think one thing I might be able to do is while I'm answering the super chats, I can put them on the screen, I think I can do that if I go back to the beginning. I think that's what I might do. We got Andres from Norway, Kevin from Texas. Russland equals Russia, says Etatist. Very, very good. France, someone from the French Communist Party. Get a better webcam, says Dust James. Yeah, that would be necessary, I think. But here we are. I'm using StreamYard rather than my phone and seeing how that goes. So there you go. Someone says they're from the pits of the Southwest. Very, very good. Very, very good. I've been contacted by someone who calls themselves Obnoxious Anarchist. He wants to have an exchange, which we've been wanting to do for a while. So I think I plan to talk to him probably early July. That should be good. So yeah, this is a bit of an experimental stream. We're going to see how it goes. Probably won't be as long as the others. I didn't have a big prepared speech for tonight, but I did. We are doing this because, again, we have to do this, right? I mean, they won't let me upload. They're blocking my uploads on YouTube. Who knows how long that'll go on? So, if we can't upload, well, we can stream. I guess we can stream. All right, so now we're going to do this thing. I'm going to start answering your super chats, and I'm going to scroll up, and I'm going to put the super chats on the screen while I answer them. That'll be like a new feature of using this new format. So let's see how this goes, right? I'm going to go scroll all the way up. It's taking a while. We're scrolling up, we're scrolling up, we're scrolling up. Oh, but I can't scroll all the way up. So we're not going to put them on the screen, I guess, because, or maybe we can. I don't know. No, we can't. We cannot scroll all the way up unless there's a way to only see super chats. We're experimenting. You ever do that? You like experiment, you get like a new thing. Let's see how this works, right? But yeah, I don't think it's going to let me scroll all the way up. I think some of the comments have gone away, unfortunately. Yeah, so I guess I'm just going to have to read them. Good thing I wrote them down, huh? Good thing I wrote them down. All righty. So the first super chat question I received was, leftists often hate suburbs and point to their origin as being racist. What is your position on suburbs? Well, First of all, the racist origins of the suburbs is a very American thing. That's very United States centric. In most of the world, mind you, especially in Europe and the developing world, the urban centers tend to be wealthier and the suburbs tend to be poorer. The poor people who work for the rich people in the urban centers live in the suburbs. The word barrio, which is the word that is used in Spanish-speaking communities. It's like the word used for a low-income neighborhood, literally means suburb, because in most Spanish-speaking countries, the rich people live in the city and the poor people live in the suburbs. French Revolution thoughts, right? The poor people tend to live in the suburbs, right? And in most of the world, that's how it is. Now, the reason in the United States that we have the white flight and suburbs, that's very unique to the United States, right? The most urban centers in the United States, prior to World War II, they had a black side and a white side. They had, ethnic neighborhoods of different types. They had a black neighborhood. They had an Italian neighborhood, etc. Right? New York City, everyone knew Harlem was the African-American area. Where I live out in Brooklyn, a neighborhood called Bay Ridge, that was Norwegians and Germans and folks like that. There were other neighborhoods that were Italian and such. And then the suburbs were generally not developed, right? And that there were, in Cleveland, everybody knew in Cleveland prior to the white flight that the east side of Cleveland was for black people and the west side of Cleveland was for white people. And that there was neighborhoods were largely ethnic and, pretty segregated. But most northern cities had a black part of town and a white part of town. And the white part of town was usually ethnic, and not all of the east side of Cleveland was black. For example, there was Little Italy on the east side of Cleveland that was like the Italian neighborhood. The white flight, that was in response to school integration, largely school busing, but also in response to some of the urban rebellions and such. You had a lot of white people fleeing to the suburbs. Now, prior to that, you also had the situation where there was redlining, where white people were able to get loans for housing that black people weren't able to get. And yeah, the origin of the suburbs in the United States is pretty racist, right? But that's very unique to the USA. Suburbs just mean little cities outside of major cities. That's really all that it means. And around the world, it doesn't have the same connotation. So that's the first thing to point out. The second thing to point out is that suburbs themselves are changing. So first of all, cities are changing too. There's gentrification, as Chaya pointed out in the chat. There's gentrification, meaning that it's getting harder and harder for low-income people to live in cities. Meanwhile, a lot of cities, the downtown areas, the areas, that are being turned into kind of playgrounds for rich kids, right? They're gentrifying the downtown areas. They got hipster bars with very expensive drinks, and they're kind of gentrifying cities. It's getting harder for working people to live in the cities. And on top of that, the suburbs are getting poorer. What made the suburbs was largely good paying industrial jobs. It was good paying industrial jobs that made the suburbs in a lot of cases. It was, Cleveland, for example. I know a lot about Cleveland because I lived there for a long time. In Cleveland, you had the steel mills, the steel yards, and you had, I believe it was Glenville, in Glenville, Cleveland, outside of Cleveland, Glenville, you had, a suburb basically where they had, an auto plant, and it was the good paying industrial jobs that made the suburbs, right? and the good paying industrial jobs are gone. So, property values in the suburbs in terms of how much, homes are worth and stuff has significantly decreased since the 2008 financial crisis. There were a lot of home foreclosures all over the suburbs. So the suburbs aren't the suburbs anymore. They're not what they once were. They're not the suburbs of the 70s, 80s, and 90s, mind you. On top of that, you have gentrification in the cities, and all of this just adds to a big mess. So you're asking me if am I against suburbs? Well, no, I'm not against suburbs as a concept. I'm telling you that what suburbs mean in the United States is starting to change because of a number of factors, and that this is what people need to think about. Now, I didn't even grow up in a suburb, right? Most people assume all white people grow up in suburbs, and that's not true, right? I mean, I grew up in a rural area. The town I grew up in was definitely not a suburb. It took an hour and a half at least to get to Cleveland. It was not a suburb. 5,000, 10,000 people in my town, graduating class of 115 people. I did not grow up in a suburb. And I've had that thrown at me many times. People say, yeah, you're from the suburbs. Where do they get this? I said, no, I'm not from the suburbs. I'm definitely not from the suburbs, right? And I get that thrown at me sometimes. And I realize that a lot of people assume that all white people who aren't from an urban area must be from the suburbs. And it's like, no, there are many different parts of the United States, rural areas. There's a lot of people in the United States who live in rural areas, for example. And in some places, you go to like Northern Virginia, the suburbs in Northern Virginia, that's massive, right? The suburbs of Chicago. It's like, and the suburbs of Chicago, for example, they include a lot of Northern Indiana, right? Is considered as the Chicago metropolitan area. So where is the line between suburb and place that's a little more populated near a city, right? Because you could argue, right? Some might argue that Northern Indiana, all of Northern Indiana is part of the suburbs of Chicago. Well, obviously that's not the case, but the area that's considered the suburbs of Chicago is very massive, right? Virginia, same thing, Northern Virginia, right? There's a lot of area there that could be considered suburbs. And where is the line between suburbs and rural? Like, where do you ultimately get to rural area and it's not the suburbs? I guess when you start seeing cornfields. Where I grew up, a lot of cornfields. I think once you're seeing lots of cornfields, you are not in the suburbs. But yeah, right. Cities where you're seeing skyscrapers and tall buildings. Once you get out of the cities, you're not seeing skyscrapers and tall buildings. You're in the suburbs. Once you start seeing cornfields, then you are not in the suburbs anymore. You're in the country. I think that's how it works, but who knows? Who knows, right? Who's going to make the rules? Who makes these rules, right? There's really, again, it's like a lot of things. Now, there are city lines, right? Now, that's pretty clear. There's a line. There is a line, right? You're one side of this line, you're in Cleveland. Another side of the line, you're in East Cleveland. But is East Cleveland a suburb, right? East Cleveland is not very prosperous in comparison to regular Cleveland. Is East Cleveland a suburb? Technically it's a suburb, but it's considered an urban part of Cleveland, right? So that's where this all gets fishy and messy, and it all gets very, very confusing, right? But yeah, the suburbs are considered the more prosperous and more white areas surrounding cities. The rural areas are where there's farmers, right? That's generally the way these things work. I do remember when I was in elementary school, and I didn't even live in the town I grew up in. The town I grew up in was considered a city, right? It was a city. It got city status in 1950. It was technically a city. It had enough population. But before that, I lived in an even smaller place. That school district that I went to when I was a very small kid, I went to elementary school there. It was technically not a city. It was a village, right? It was the village. And I remember that they had a village council rather than a city council, because according to Ohio law, they did not have enough of a population to be considered a city. They were considered to be a village, right? You know me, Park. I'll talk about that. Park, Fox interview. I saw that, and I'll talk about that for sure. So there you go. I don't know. Anyway, enough about cities and suburbs and all that. It was all very fascinating to me. And I must say, there's suburbs and there's suburbs, right? You go to Cleveland. Parma is a suburb of Cleveland. It's very working class. A lot of Eastern European folks there. it's white people largely, but it's, folks from Hungary, folks from Ukraine, working class, folks. You go to Hudson, Ohio, for example. That's a suburb. Very different, very, very, very different than Parma, right? That's a lot more doctors, a lot more lawyers. It's an upper class suburb, for example. Beechwood, right, is very different, right? Current Marxist economic analysis of inflation, opinion of El Salvador President Bukele, adoption of current. Okay. Economic analysis of inflation and Bitcoin, El Salvador. Very good. All right. All righty. Wrote it down. Okay. All right. Enough about suburbs. All right. Who is the worst traitor to communism? Well, folks, it's tempting to say like Trotsky or something like that, but I'm not going to say that, right? Because at least Trotsky believed what he was saying. Okay. Trotsky, as wrong as he was, his theory of permanent revolution was wrong. His critique of Soviet foreign policy was wrong. But, Trotsky believed what he was saying. He maintained that he was holding out. He was the true Bolshevik. He was holding out the Bolshevik line. Stalin had abandoned it. The Soviet Union had become a degenerated worker state. But he believed what he was saying. Okay? But people like Whittaker Chambers, for example. Whittaker Chambers became the editor of National Review magazine, conservative. He wrote a book called Witness. People like that, they just lie through their teeth. All right. And, like David Horowitz, for example. David Horowitz, you read his autobiography, he's saying stuff that's so outlandish and ridiculous. When people just make stuff up, that's a problem. When people, honestly, look, you read Howard Fast, for example. Howard Fast was a member of the Communist Party USA. He was a famous writer. He wrote Freedom Road, which is a very good novel about the Black freedom struggle and the struggle in the Reconstruction and the fight against the Ku Klux Klan. He wrote Spartacus, which they eventually made into a Hollywood movie. Howard Fast wrote a very good autobiography about his time in the Communist Party. It was called Being Red. And it ends with him, quitting the Communist Party. But, it's honest, right? He didn't, he had some good experiences. He had some bad experiences. And so then he wrote, an autobiography giving his side of the story. Very honest, to the point. But Whittaker Chambers, David Horowitz, people like that, right? They become right-wing. I think they become cynical when it really gets down to it. I think that when they were communists, they believed in something. They believed in something. And they got disillusioned. They may have had they probably had some very bad experiences with communists, but they also saw that we weren't going to see a revolution, right? So they stopped being interested in communism, but they wanted to continue to have a career, right? They wanted to be selling books and all of that. So they wrote outrageous, over-the-top, ridiculous anti-communist lies to sell books. And that is the worst kind, right? Look, Howard Fast, he didn't like the Communist Party USA. And he describes some of the stuff that he didn't like in the Communist Party USA. If you read Being Read by Howard Fast, one thing he describes is that he was not allowed to use the word boy or girl when he wrote articles about children that were African American. Right? Because it was considered, Communist Party USA had the rule that because black men, adult black men are called boy, right? It was like a Southern racist thing to do. It'd say boy, it's a racist thing to do, right? So because of that, you could not refer to any African-American child as a boy or a girl in the Communist Party publication. They had to call them youth. You could call them a youth. And he's furious about that. Well, is that a little bit of an arbitrary rule? When you have to refer to a 5-year-old African-American child, if you're writing an article, as a youth rather than a boy or a girl because of racial sensitivity, is that a little bit over the top and PC? Maybe. I don't think that's a reason to quit the Communist Party, but he's honest. That's something that I'm sure really happened. I am sure the Daily Worker did have that rule about how one refers to an African-American child. You cannot call them boy or girl. They have to call them youth. I'm sure that rule existed, and maybe it wasn't a good rule. I don't think that's a reason to quit the party. All right. I don't think that's a reason to quit the party, but, that really happened, I'm sure. I don't think he made that up. Chomsky, harmful. Don't think he made that up. I think that really happened. And he's honest about it. And he talks about how often they were sent to just kind of campaign for Democrats, and they were kind of told to conceal that they were communists because they thought that the Republicans were the main danger in McCarthyism, and he didn't like that. Did that actually happen? Yeah, I bet it did. I bet that did actually happen. You read Howard Fast's autobiography. He's not lying. He's not making anything up. He's honest about his experiences, some good, some bad. Okay. Trotsky has his critique. He did not agree with Stalin, right? Now, there are a couple things that Trotsky does lie about in order to make himself look better. Trotsky's History of the Russian Revolution, if you read it, there's a couple times where he's not being honest. He makes it sound like the Bolsheviks were all a bunch of reformists until Lenin showed up and whipped them into shape. The Bolsheviks were all just a bunch of reformists, and there wasn't going to be any revolution. But luckily, Lenin came in from exile and whipped him into shape. Why does he say that? Well, he says that mainly because Stalin was running the Bolshevik organization before Lenin came back. Stalin was the editor of Pravda, which was the daily agitational newspaper of the Bolsheviks, number one. And number two, Trotsky wasn't a Bolshevik. Trotsky didn't join the Bolsheviks until July of 1917. So it makes sense that Trotsky would lie, and just make it sound like, oh, the Bolsheviks were awful until Lenin showed up, until like right before, Trotsky joined, the Bolsheviks were awful. That makes perfect sense. Makes perfect sense that he would lie like that. Makes perfect sense that he would lie like that. No question about it. There's also this silly story that's a myth that the Bolsheviks didn't want to take power and have a revolution, and they were having a meeting, and then a worker burst into the meeting and told the Bolsheviks that they better take power because if they didn't, the workers were going to rise up anyway. And, Trotsky repeats this myth, and it's a great story. It sounds like a great story. It's just Stalin and many other historians have pointed out it's not true. It's an urban legend. Didn't happen because the Bolsheviks at the time of the Russian Revolution were not having meetings at places where random people off the street could just walk in and say stuff like that, right? So, that didn't happen. I mean, that just, I'm sorry, but the idea that the Bolsheviks were having a meeting discussing whether they would seize power and a random worker walked in and just told them that didn't happen. So Trotsky's lying about that. The other thing, and Grover, to his credit, has discovered that there are mail receipts. Right? Trotsky maintained that he had no contact with Zinoviev, no contact with Bukharin, and that's one of the main points that he makes throughout his defense, his claim that Stalin had framed him up. He says he never spoke to Bukharin, never spoke to Zinoviev. Well, we have mail receipts right now in the Trotsky archives. That's not true. Trotsky did send at least some letters, and there were mail receipts. There was stuff sent in the mail from Trotsky to Bukharin and Zinoviev, and it wasn't sent to the Soviet Union, it was sent to Germany. When Zinoviev and Bukharin were in Germany, Trotsky sent him stuff in the mail. And so he lies about that. So Trotsky can be dishonest, but again, he believes what he's saying, right? Howard Fast can quit the Communist Party, and he believes what he's saying. He has some legit critiques, whatever. But you read David Horowitz, right? David Horowitz talks about how he went to a communist after-school program. And in his autobiography, he says he went to a communist after-school program. And at this communist after-school program, they read nothing but The Crucible by Arthur Miller. The Crucible by Arthur Miller. I think they read probably actual communist material. Just saying. I mean, I have a feeling they probably read actual communist material, not a liberal play that everybody knows that I read in public school. Yeah, that's a little shady. He makes some allegations about them killing his girlfriend. And the more you look into David Horowitz and his memoir, it's clear he's lying through his teeth. He's a conservative now. He wants to write a scary, tell-all. And the same with Whittaker Chambers. This is the funniest one. Whittaker Chambers, in his autobiography, he talks about how when he was in the in the Communist Party. When people would disagree with the party line, they would get an invitation to go to Moscow and never return. It's like, really? I mean, I'm just sorry. That is so ridiculous. That is so absolutely ridiculous. Whittaker Chambers, it makes so, as Chaya says, I'll put you on the screen there, Chaya. Witness makes so many outrageous claims, you can't take it seriously. And you were exactly right about that, Chaya. I mean, it is absolutely ridiculous. And it's like, at that point, when people are lying that blatantly, you can't respect them at that point. Trotsky, you can respect. Howard Fast, you can respect. But I'm sorry, when people are lying that blatantly, when they're it's practically pornography for conservatives, practically. It's just like anti-communist McCarthyite pornography, those kind of folks I really have no respect for. I really don't have any respect for them. You can talk about what you're unhappy with, you can talk about what you disagree with. When you start making up really crazy, over the top, and then they told me that they wanted to get rid of freedom. They don't like freedom. It's like, come on. One story that I did hear that was particularly funny. I mean, look, Nelson Peary, let me just add this. So Nelson Peary, I have a lot of respect for Nelson Peary. I've learned so much from his work. His book, The Future is Up to Us, is about economics and capitalism, amazing book. His memoir, Black Radical, of his time as a black organizer in the Communist Party, is an amazing book. And one thing that comes across in Nelson Peary and his writing and Harry Haywood's memoir is that, unfortunately, because, and we talk about this, but because the Communist Party, because it was a lot of very poor people, a lot of working class people, and, their livelihoods depended on it, and they were up against the state and the FBI and all that, it became a rather authoritarian group, rather authoritarian and such. And that, Nelson Peary tells the story. I believe this is absolutely true, that 1948, he was a member of the Communist Party. He just joined or whatever. And they had the state convention of the Communist Party in Minnesota. And the state convention, they were passing resolutions. And the resolutions they were all passing were unanimous. They were passing this resolution, that resolution. So they had a resolution to honor Tito, the leader of Yugoslavia. And they had just had their anti-Browder campaign. So Nelson Peary voted no on the resolution, didn't want to honor Tito. And he said that he thought Tito was a revisionist. And the room fell silent, just fell silent, that somebody would vote no on the resolution. And afterwards, they came up to him and they said, we don't really think the party's right for you. And they were basically going to expel him from the Communist Party USA for voting against Tito. But then the next day, a resolution came in. The headline in the Daily Worker was Stalin denounces Tito. And so then he was right. And so they welcomed him back in. And that kind of attitude of conformity, like this kind of, we follow the leader. And if you don't follow the leader, you kind of have a bad attitude. I saw that. The Workers' World Party was like that. They were absolutely like that. And many people who've been in leftist groups have seen that kind of attitude. And that's not good. You don't want to create an atmosphere like that. That creates an atmosphere where ultimately problems can't get resolved. And I think the Soviet Union, that was one of their problems, is that problems couldn't get resolved. When you create an atmosphere where it's not safe to disagree, people are still going to disagree, but the disagreeing doesn't go on in public. It goes on behind closed doors, and then that results in a situation where problems can't get corrected. Intersectionality be useful in bringing about general uprising. All right. Intersectionality. Useful for balkanizing. All righty. These are some interesting super chats. So anyway, the role of Christianity in imperialism. Okay, well, first of all, that's the next super chat, is the role of Christianity in imperialism. Well, the first thing we need to get out of the way here, and this is my biggest pet peeve. Okay, imperialism is not the same thing as colonialism. When I talk about imperialism, I'm a Marxist. And when I talk about imperialism, I'm talking about a global economic system. Economic system. I'm not talking about an action. Imperialism is not a policy. Imperialism is not a verb. It's not something you do. Colonialism is a country taking over another country. But imperialism is a system. Let me repeat this. Imperialism is a system. Imperialism is a system. Imperialism is a system. Imperialism is a system. Let me repeat that. Imperialism is a system. It is a system of global monopoly capitalism. Imperialism did not emerge until the 1890s, right? Imperialism was a global economic system that emerged in the 1890s, early 1900s. That's what imperialism is. Did Christianity play a role in that system? Absolutely. If you look at the way the Church of England operated, the Church of England had been around since King Henry VIII, since King Henry VIII broke with the Catholic Church. But the Church of England, their worldview very much changed during the rise of British imperialism. And there became a belief that it was Britain's destiny to Christianize the world. Biggest difference between there was a belief that it was the destiny of Britain to Christianize the world, and that this was a belief among American imperialists, also, right? That it was the way Hawaii was seized. You look at the history of seizing Hawaii. It was missionaries, Christian missionaries, played a very big role in it. The excuse the United States used for sending troops to China in 1901 to put down the Boxer Rebellion was alleging that the Boxers had been attacking Christian missionaries. So yes, in the early years of imperialism, when imperialism was in ascendancy, justification for it, justification for military conquest, defense of colonialism was often done in the name of Christianity. No question about it. No question about it. There's a song, there's a hymn called Onward Christian Soldiers that was popular at the time, that was used to support imperialist wars. Onward Christian soldiers, marching as to war. Well, there was a spoof, the Wobblies, the IWW, they wrote their own version of that song, making fun of it, and showing how basically, in a lot of ways, Christianity had just been co-opted to serve imperialism. And that was not good, not a good thing, not a good thing. So there you go. There you go. So yeah, I mean, there you go. I mean, I don't know what more to say about it. But it's important to note, though, that Christianity played a much bigger role in colonialism. And colonialism, that was the Spanish, conquering the Americas and slaughtering the Americans. That was, the 13 colonies of Britain. Colonialism and the economic understanding of the system of imperialism are different. And that's my biggest pet peeve. I see this all the time as people say imperialism and they just mean one country attacking another country. They say the Roman Empire was imperialism. No, it wasn't, right? The Roman Empire was not capitalist. Right? It wasn't the Leninist understanding of imperialism. It may have been an empire, but imperialism is a system. Imperialism is a system. It is a global economic system, and that is what we need to be absolutely clear on. How do the IRA in comparison to the Naxals and the Shining Path? Well, here's the thing. The Provisional Irish... So when you say IRA, you're referring to a number of different groups, okay? So first of all, I mean, for a long time, Ireland was itself just a colony of the British. And so, in the 19 teens, you had James Connolly and others. And eventually you had the Irish Republican Army, people that wanted to fight for Irish independence. Now, after the Irish Free State was created, and after, Northern Ireland and the division and all of that, then, after World War II, you have the Provisional Irish Republican Army, the Provos that were formed. That's where you get, where is it? Who is it? The Provos. You have Bobby Sands, and you have Jerry Adams, who was the spokesperson for Sinn Féin, which was the political wing of the Provisional IRA. You have the Provisional IRA, and that was formed in the 60s, right? And the Provisional IRA, you went to any Catholic neighborhood, people thought they were heroes, right? They were supported. The Provisional IRA was supported. Now, in the 90s, you had the Good Friday Agreement that was signed. And the Provisional IRA laid down their arms. Sinn Féin joined the government. And so you had the Good Friday Agreement. All right, neoliberalism. Neoliberalism, most advanced stage. And so you had the provisional IRA, right, laid down their arms. So, you know, at this point, it's pretty clear that most people living in Northern Ireland, most Roman Catholics and Catholic neighborhoods and people living in Northern Ireland support Sinn Féin. They don't want to resume armed struggle at this time. Now, there are a couple groups that exist. I believe there's the 32 county sovereignty movement, there's the real IRA, and there's, what is it? IRA, what is it? IRA something or other. Those groups don't have any mass base of support. I mean, it's not that, you know, not that they're wrong in wanting, you know, Irish, you know, I'm for the, you know, 32 county Ireland, right? I'm for that. I'm for Irish reunification. But these groups that are engaging in armed terrorism and left adventurism, they're not helping. That's not good. They shouldn't be doing that. And they shouldn't be doing it because the population doesn't support them, because there is the possibility at this point, you know, there could be a democratic referendum for independence. And so what they're doing, it's the population isn't with them, and there's no reason for them to be doing it because the road of a peaceful independence is possible. You know, you could have a peaceful transition to a democratic, independent, socialist Ireland, right? That could happen through the peaceful road. So, you know, the Good Friday Agreement has been signed, and the Provisional Irish Republican Army and Sinn Féin recognize the Good Friday Agreement. So these groups that are engaging in the terrorism now, they are a lot like the Naxals. They are a lot like the Shining Path, right? I mean, in that they don't have a mass base of support, in that they're engaging in violence when it's, you know, when that is not, you know, they're not being forced to. I mean, they have the option of engaging in peaceful transition. They're not doing it. So in that sense, I would compare, like, you know, like IRA continuity, real IRA, groups like that. Yeah, I would compare them to the Naxals or the Shining Path. But, you know, the IRA of the 70s and 80s, when there wasn't, first of all, there wasn't the Good Friday Agreement intact. They couldn't vote for independence, number one. And number two, you know, their ability to peacefully organize was being violently suppressed. And number three, there was a huge base of support for what they were doing. Any Catholic neighborhood, they would support what you were doing. It was a different situation. I mean, what Bobby Sands and Jerry Adams and others were doing in the 70s and 80s is very different than what some of the groups are doing now. You know, so yeah, I mean, it's just, you know, and again, this is an important question. Communists favor a peaceful transition. Right? Let me emphasize this. Communists do not like violence. Communists do not advocate violence. They do not advocate the revolutionary overthrow. They favor a peaceful democratic transition to socialism. But when the bosses are violent and extreme and prevent that and overturn people's democratic rights and threaten people's right to peacefully organize, people have the right to, you know, defend themselves. Italian Red Brigades versus Shining Path, you know, and that's a little bit of a different situation. And on top of that, even in those situations, and James Terry says, thank you, even in those situations, mind you, right? Even in those kind of situations, you know, even in those kind of situations, it has to be the broad masses. The masses have to feel that it's necessary for them to engage in armed self-defense, right? It can't just be the revolutionaries deciding that for the masses, right? The masses themselves have to go through the process. They have to feel that they have no other choice, and they have to see it for themselves, right? And the vanguard can't just go to the people and tell them, you know, even in a situation where it may be necessary for the people to defend themselves, right? Even in such a situation, the broad masses have to be aware of that, right? I mean, they have to be aware of that, and they may have to try to peacefully organize for a long time and just get shot down and killed. And yeah, I mean, it's so, you know, so people who fetishize violence, people who promote terrorism and all that, they're wrong. They're just downright wrong. And they just don't understand how revolutions tend to work. And that's why I gave you the answer. And I've talked about this before. William Z. Foster is writing on this. We advocate a peaceful democratic transition to socialism. That's the responsible position. What do I think of economic zones in China? Well, look, they are considered the crowning achievement, just the crowning achievement of Deng Xiaoping. Shenzhen, I'm sure I'm butchering that pronunciation. And now, you know, Xi Jinping is building his own model city, the Saigon New area. the Saigon area. And it's an amazing, they call it the future city, the future hotel. I mean, it's amazing, right? And this city building, right? Building a model city. This is part of, the model of socialism with Chinese characteristics is they try a policy in one city before they apply it nationally in order to see if it works, right? And, this is kind of the neat part of socialism with Chinese characteristics. What is my stance on climate change? As I said before, climate change is a reality. I think that man-made climate change, man-made global warming, that's happening. We have to get off of fossil fuels. And the answer is progress. The answer is scientific progress. It's not everyone having less. It's not reducing human consumption. The answer is progress. There is no limit to growth. There is only a limit to the irrational capitalist system, right? We have to get off of fossil fuels. Right? We have to get off of fossil fuels. The fossil fuel economy is a prison house for humanity. Fusion City now. Fusion City now. We must build Fusion City. There needs to be an emergency joint effort with the United States, China, Russia, India, South Africa. All kinds of countries in the world need to pool all their resources and all their scientists. We need to build Fusion City in the Midwest. Fusion City now. Okay, social democracy versus liberal democracy. It's going to be a long one tonight. All right. Good thing my opening remarks weren't too long because you all have lots of questions. That's okay. FARC and other Latin American groups are prime examples. All right. FARC, self-defense. All right. So there you go. All right. So there you go. Okay. Alrighty. We need, the answer to climate change is human creativity and human growth. All right. Labor accusations against China. Well, look, I'm sure there are things in China, you talk about the conditions in some of these factories and I hear those stories too, and that's awful. But what you don't hear about is how when the Chinese workers go on strike, the government supports them. You don't hear about that. You don't hear about how the Chinese Communist Party will stand up to these corporations. And you don't hear that side of things. And there's more to the story than that. You don't hear about millions of people raised up out of poverty, right? If China was just letting corporations do whatever they want, you wouldn't have millions and millions of people rising up from poverty. When people just highlight the conditions in one particular factory, they don't show the workers organizing and resisting with this Chinese government support. They don't show how things have changed. Again, it's selective. Are there bad things in China? Of course there are. Is China heaven on earth? No. Is China, a socialist paradise? No. China is a country without a capitalist economy. It's a country where they have central planning and they've been able to raise a lot of people out of poverty and create a lot of growth. But they have problems just like any other country. But you're only, this is selective. You're only hearing one side of the story. So there you go. All right. Canadian imperialism, mining. Well, look, Canada is an imperialist country. It's certainly nowhere on par with the United States and all that, but it's definitely an imperialist country. It's part of the Western capitalist thing. There are, Canadian corporations that reap super profits at the expense of the developing world. It fits, there's a Canadian labor aristocracy. There is stratification of the working class in Canada. So yeah, Canadian imperialism is a reality. There's definitely Canadian mining corporations that are very powerful. That all that exists. I don't know what you want me to say about it. Okay. What role did the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact play in the downfall of the USSR? Well, the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact was in 1939. All right, that was in 1939. The Soviet Union had gone to every major Western country and wanted to make a non-aggression pact. None of them would do it with them, so they went and signed a non-aggression pact with the Nazis. That was the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact. The Nazis broke it. They broke the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact, right? The Trotskyites, they made a song to mock the Soviet Union for the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact. They said, up in Moscow, in the Kremlin, in the fall of 39, there's a Russian and a Prussian riding up the party line. That's the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact. So that was in 1939, in the fall of 39. Okay, the fall of the Soviet Union was in 1991. So there's about a long gap between those two events. I don't really think that the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact had that much to do with the fall of the Soviet Union. I mean, I'm sure, there was had some impact, but I really doubt, I really, really, really doubt that they're like directly linked. Sam Marcy, the leader of the Workers' World Party, was a Trotskyite. He argued that the way the Soviet Union explained the pact to their population was not honest or something. That I don't even agree with Sam Marcy about that. I think Sam Marcy was just, I think he's wrong about that. Republic of Korea, a colony. All right. I think he was wrong about that. And some Trotskyites will talk about that. You want to get really technical. Most Trotskyites think that that Trotsky opposed the pact. If you want to get technical, Trotsky didn't oppose the pact. Trotsky opposed the way the pact was carried out. Most Trotskyites don't know that. But technically, Trotsky said the Soviet Union had the right to sign a treaty with Nazi Germany, but they should have done it in a more principled way or something like that. And that was always the thing. Kashama Sawan and Socialist Alternative. All right. All right. Okay. All righty. Okay. Kwame Nkrumah. Kwame Nkrumah was a socialist. He was a leader of Ghana. He developed a political ideology he called African socialism. And he industrialized Ghana with the help of the Soviet Union. And he was considered just a beacon of revolutionary African anti-imperialism. He met with John F. Kennedy. He did meet with Kennedy, but he was considered pro-Soviet, and he did a lot to improve people's living standards in Ghana. Absolutely. He was a progressive, and he was an inspirer of anti-colonial struggles all throughout Africa. He was very much a giant, a great revolutionary leader. I have a lot of admiration for Kwame Nkrumah. All right. Is Belarus following the original Soviet model? Not exactly. I understand there are a lot more private companies, but it's still largely a state-run economy. It did not have the shock therapy neoliberal reforms that the rest of the former Soviet Union had. That's why it's referred to as the last Soviet republic. There's still a lot of, it's still mainly state-run industries in Belarus. But there's still some privatizations, and it's not the Soviet system exactly, but it's much more in line with the Soviet system than the rest of the former Soviet Union. All right. What do I think of the French Revolution? Well, look, feudalism in France had to be overturned. Now, obviously, the reign of terror was horrendous, and largely, and this is a big thesis in my book on Kamala Harris, I talk about how a lot of the way the bourgeoisie of France, staged the French Revolution involved unleashing people's impulses toward violence, people's impulses toward sex. The Marquis de Sade, the term sadism is derived from. He was very key in the agitation and carrying out of the French Revolution. The reign of terror was absolutely horrendous. Then you had Thermidor and eventually the rise of Napoleon. Liberals backing decolonization, and the French Revolution was pretty awful in a lot of ways, but it was, it was the birth of the modern world. It was tearing apart feudalism. It was a historical advance, but it was the capitalist class, very violently tearing apart French feudalism. One thing that people often will point out is that the French national anthem, La Marseillaise, is very, very violent. There's a lot of references to throat cutting and slaughtering and such, and that if you listen to Marxist anthems, they don't have all that violence in them. The bourgeoisie and their revolution, there's a lot more bloodthirsty violence and killing. And that the French Revolution was very much an explosion of sex and violence. And the two of them are linked, and it's the unleashing of impulses. And the legacy of the French Revolution is hung over leftism like a curse. All right. Cuban Revolution. Left adventurism. All right. So there you go. I'm just giving quick answers because we got a lot of things to get through. That's okay. All righty. All right. Park on Fox News interview. I don't know what that is, this uphold democracy thing. I don't know what that is. But as far as Park on Fox News, look, I thought that was comedy. I thought that was The Onion or something. It's hilarious. It's really funny. It's really, really funny that she's comparing the brainwashing of American colleges to North Korea. But hey, I'll take it. I thought it was The Onion. I really did. I thought it was a spoof from The Onion. I thought this is The Onion making fun of cancel culture or something. No, it was real. It is absolutely positively real. And I think that is hilarious. I think cancel culture is awful. I think the liberal cancel culture stuff is awful. I think Naomi Park, she's not completely honest, and that she's telling people, there's been a lot of people who poked holes in her stories. But the fact that she has gotten up and said that the brainwashing in American colleges is worse than the brainwashing in North Korea. Well, look, even she says it, right? There you go, right? How do you argue with that, right? We're supposed to go, what? We're going to go invade North Korea to liberate them? Well, even their defector says our brainwashing is even worse, so maybe we're not liberating them. It's a farce. This is a farce, okay? This is a farce. This is imperialism and Western liberalism imploding on itself, right? So it's like, it used to be that these kind of anti-communist exiles were on the same page as the ruling class. But now we have this fight in the ruling class over the woke makeover of empire. And the defectors are on the other side, right? The Trump crowd on January 6th was full of, Epoch Times and Korean Moonies and Gusanos from Miami, and it was full of anti-communist defectors that are fighting the U.S. status quo. So there's a fight in the ruling class about cancel culture, about the woke makeover of empire, about like the liberal faction that has the upper hand versus the lower levels of capital. And the defectors are on the side of the lower levels of capital. And so they're coming back and saying things against the U.S. status quo. And I think this is hilarious. I think it's hilarious. It's hilarious. I think it's hilarious. I thought the article was The Onion, but it's not The Onion, and I'll take it, right? Look, next time someone says North Korea is bad, we'll say, yeah, well, the top North Korean defector said that U.S. universities are worse than North Korea. And if some liberal says to you, well, you don't, believe that, it's like, oh, well, then why should I believe what she says about North Korea, right? Look, if she's telling the truth about North Korea, she has to be telling the truth about Columbia University. Right? I'm sorry, she can't be lying about Columbia University and telling the truth about North Korea, right? Look, if she's a credible source, she's credible on Columbia University, and she's credible about North Korea. And if we're going to believe every word she says about North Korea, then I guess we have to believe every word she says about Columbia University. So any liberal who ever quotes anything she says about North Korea, say, oh, and here's what she said about Columbia University. Is that true? And if they're going to be consistent, then it has to be true. Look, there you go. The brainwashing at Columbia University is worse than North Korea. And if you don't believe that, why, then you're saying that this defector might not be telling the truth. I think it's hilarious. I thought that it's hilarious. I thought it was hilarious. Economic analysis of inflation. Well, you'll notice that because of the pandemic, there's been a lot of printing of money. There's been a lot of money's been paid out, right? Everyone was given, their it was the stimulus or whatever to deal with that. You also have a situation where, the USA, the economy is getting worse and infrastructure is crumbling and the government's printing more money. And yes, we're in a period of inflation. Inflation is certainly rising. And, that's happening. No question about it. And this is a symptom of bigger problems. Also, the value of the dollar, you have to remember, and this is an aspect of it that many people don't talk about, is the value of the dollar is largely based on how many countries use it, right? If a lot of countries use the dollar, the value of the dollar increases because there's more demand for it. If less countries use the dollar, the value of the dollar decreases, okay? And right now, China's economy is rising. So use of Chinese currency is increasing, right? Russia has just de-dollared, okay? Russia is moving ahead to de-dollar. So with less people around the world using the dollar, right, the value of the dollar is going to decrease. Right? That's a factor that no one's talking about, right? If the demand for the dollar decreases, the more countries that use the dollar, the more valuable the dollar is. The less countries that use it, the less valuable the dollar is. That is how currency tends to work. That is just a fact. So that's going to be a big factor as well. The fact that the demand for Chinese currency is increasing, Russia has just de-dollared, that's going to have an effect on the value of the dollar as well. Now, obviously, look, we are printing money, and that's, a lot of people, money's being, was given to a lot of people and all of that. But you have to remember another thing that really contributed to the value of the dollar was the petrodollar. The fact that you could only buy oil in dollars. And the petrodollar, I mean, it's pretty much broken. I mean, at this point, it's, at this point, look, China's buying oil from Iran, and the idea that, the petrodollar had the effect of basically all roads lead to Rome. If you couldn't get US currency, US dollars, you could not get oil. That's not true anymore. North Korea can get oil without US dollars, right? People who don't have US dollars can get oil. That can happen. So that's all contributing to inflation. The value of the dollar is decreasing. The value of the dollar is decreasing because people around the world, it's not as in high demand as it once was. That is a fact. It's simply not as our economy has gotten worse, as Russia and China's economy has gotten better, as China's economy in particular has gotten better, as the petrodollar has been broken, the value of the dollar has gone down. There you go. Bitcoin. Well, look, I saw, what about El Salvador recognizing Bitcoin as an official currency. I mean, good luck with that. I don't think that's a good idea. I really don't think that's a good idea. I am not very positive on Bitcoin, honestly. This is one of those schemes where you make money out of money. You make money out of money. Nothing's being created. I guess a lot of electricity is being used, but other than that, you're not really making anything. And, right now, a lot of people are getting money from Bitcoin. And I probably sound like a little bit of a hypocrite because I am on Odyssey, right? I do use Odyssey. So I have some cryptocurrency, right? Because I make Odyssey videos. So I guess on my Odyssey account, because I have an Odyssey account, I do have some cryptocurrency. So I may be a hypocrite. But honestly, I don't think that this is necessary good. Buyer's remorse. Eastern Europe, leave USSR. I don't think Bitcoin is going anyplace good. That's my opinion. Okie dokie. Is Noam Chomsky harmful? I think Noam Chomsky plays a more negative role than he once did. When the USSR existed in the 70s and 80s, even up into the 90s, Noam Chomsky played a much more positive role. He was criticizing U.S. foreign policy. He was there to give the other side of the story, around Nicaragua, around the Palestinians, around Iraq and Iran, and, many countries around the world. The job of Noam Chomsky was to be kind of, he was there to be the liberal opposition. He was there to be this prominent American academic who gave the other side of the story. And what's particularly interesting about Noam Chomsky is if you went to the USSR, if you went to Europe, Western Europe, many people believed Noam Chomsky was a household name. People thought all Americans knew Noam Chomsky, listened to Noam Chomsky. That wasn't true, right? Noam Chomsky was about making the United States look like a more liberal place than it really was. Most Americans had never heard of Noam Chomsky. Leftists knew who he was, academics knew who he was, but most Americans had never heard of him. Average Americans were not listening to Noam Chomsky, had never heard of Noam Chomsky. But he played that role. And he is listed as one of the top, cited sources in the English language. And that's because around the world, he was quoted quite a bit. And the Soviet press would quote him a lot because he was a prominent American academic who was critical of U.S. foreign policy. And the more liberal voices from the West would quote him a lot. And he was part of, it was like good cop, bad cop. You had Ronald Reagan, you had the Republicans, you had, and then you had Noam Chomsky. And he was there to show that America was better. And part of doing that was giving voice to anti-imperialist perspectives. During the Obama years, there was kind of a shift. And nowadays, he doesn't play that role. He's critical of Israel. He's critical of Israel, but he doesn't support boycotting Israel. And he tends to, when it comes to Libya, when it comes to Syria, he tends to take mainstream positions. And if you follow Amy Goodman, Noam Chomsky, they have about the same political orientation on international issues. And their foreign policy tends to line up pretty closely with Qatar. The Qatar, Turkey, the Muslim Brotherhood, again, anti-Iran, but also anti-Israel, whatever the Al Jazeera Qatar current is saying, that's what Amy Goodman says, that's what Noam Chomsky says. And you can speculate about why that is, and it doesn't always line up. There are times where they don't completely line up, but that seems about where they're at. They tend to follow, in the Middle East, you have, the axis of resistance, Syria, Iran, Hezbollah, the Houthis, the Bahrain resistance, etc. Then you have the Saudis and the Wahhabis, and then you have this other current, the Muslim Brotherhood. Right? The Muslim Brotherhood, that's Turkey and Qatar, very anti-Israel, but also very anti-Iran, and, very much want to overthrow Assad, very much wanted to overthrow, Gaddafi. That current, that's, if you want to know what Chomsky thinks these days, you want to know what Amy Goodman thinks these days, look at what the Muslim Brotherhood and what Turkey and Qatar are saying. They follow the party line exactly. That's what they do. And I don't know what it is. I mean, and that's their foreign policy line. That's how they line up. They have the Al Jazeera foreign policy perspective. So that's where Chomsky's at. He used to be halfway sympathetic to the Soviet or anti-imperialist perspective. And that was in the 70s and 80s. Now he's giving you the Al Jazeera perspective, which is interesting. Very interesting. I know that Zbigniew Brzezinski was very key in courting the Muslim Brotherhood to be allies of the United States. So, I don't want to get into it any further because, again, we're speculating. We don't want to speculate. We want to just say what we know. That's what I've observed very clearly. And I don't want to get into why because I don't really know why at the end of the day. I don't know why. So there you go. Is intersectionality useful or balkanizing? I think, okay, so first of all, intersectionality generally just refers to the fact that different struggles against oppression are linked. And there is nothing wrong with that. And I think that's generally a good thing, right? That often economic struggles, like the struggle against poverty, the struggle of workers' rights and decent wages, combines with struggles against racism, because Black people historically in the United States have been the last hired and the first fired. And, the predatory lending, and the mortgage ripoff schemes, the home foreclosures in 2008 first hit the Black community before it spread to the white community, right? And that often struggles against racism or struggles against sexism and what women face on the job, often there is overlap between struggles that people face against oppression. And communists have always known that. And they didn't call it intersectionality, they called it solidarity, right? Black and white unite and fight. An injury to one is an injury to all. If you're dissing the sisters, you ain't fighting the power, as the Black Panthers used to say, right? This is communists knew this. This is like, duh, this is like communism 101. That's why communists, despite, being the leaders of the labor movement and building the labor unions, were always, talking about Jim Crow segregation. That's why they built the Civil Rights Congress and raised the case of the Scottsboro Nine, it was just, this is like 101, right? That oppression is linked. Racism is linked to the oppression of the working class. Racism is the boss's tool to divide the workers, right? I used to carry a sign around at Occupy Wall Street. When I was an Occupy Wall Street activist, I used to carry around a sign. It said, racism, boss's tool to divide the workers. This is common sense, right? This is just common sense. So why do we call it intersectionality? Why don't we just call it solidarity, right? There's nothing wrong with the concept. The concept is absolutely correct. And no, it's not balkanizing and all of that. But why do we call it intersectionality rather than solidarity? Because this is a word that some academic thought up and it doesn't sound communist. And it leads you away from a communist narrative. And everyone started talking about intersectionality at a time when all of a sudden you can't talk about Marxism. When all of a sudden left-wing circles became infected with this new ideology that was cooked up in some think tank and, paid for, and, it's bell hooks and it's Judith Butler and it's all this stuff. And no, we can't talk about communism. We got to talk about whatever this stuff is. Well, it's a game that people play, and I don't like it, right? Let's talk about Marxism. Go read William C. Foster. Go read Gus Hall, right? We don't have to abandon revolutionary Marxism. I'm sorry, but yeah, there you go. But yeah, the concept, right, that struggles against oppression are linked is absolutely correct. Absolutely correct. No disagreement. All right. Biggest difference between the USSR and China. Well, I mean, these are two different countries with two different histories. I mean, there's so many differences, right? You can't compare. Russia is one country with one history, with one, I mean, China is you can't, I mean, this is like the biggest difference between them. I mean, geography, population, but I mean, if you want to talk about the political system, the biggest difference, I would think, is that the USSR, I've said over and over again, the reason the USSR fell is because the system needed reform. In the 70s and 80s, the USSR, the system wasn't going to survive. It needed to be updated and reformed. It wasn't working, okay? The problem is that Gorbachev, when he tried to change the system, resulted in overthrowing it. Well, China, on the other hand, they have been able to adjust and adapt their socialism so much and stay in power. Chinese socialism was not the same in the 50s as it was in the 60s, wasn't the same in the 70s as it was in the 60s, wasn't the same in the 80s as it was in the 70s. Chinese socialism is always changing. Whereas in the USSR, starting in the 30s, but most especially after World War II, the system became very, very rigid and solidified. And that was a weakness the imperialists were able to use. But you're asking me about the differences, many, many differences. But in terms of the political system, Chinese socialism is always changing, whereas Soviet socialism was very orthodox and solidified, and ultimately that played a role in its downfall. All right, okay. All right, Bashar, Assad, economic versus father. All righty. How do you need for communism and conversations about intersectionality and decolonization? Bring up communism in conversations about intersectionality and decolonize. All righty. Very good. We're getting right through these. Is neoliberalism the most developed stage of imperialism? No, I argue that imperialism is transitioning, that we've entered a new stage that I have often referred to by the term that a friend of mine invented, accumulation through destruction. And if you go and watch my class, What is Scientific Socialism? I talk about this, that the fact that we're deindustrializing the first world, the fact that the primary way that the imperialists make money now is through destroying things, that we are entering kind of a meltdown of capitalism, where degrowth and destruction is the primary way that imperialism is enriching itself and holding on to its existence. And I would argue that neoliberalism is imperialism entering a new stage. This is imperialism in decline. Right, in the 1890s, 1900, 1910, this was imperialism in ascendancy. I would argue we're now in the period of imperialism, in decline. And because of that, imperialism is now in a period where its primary means of accumulation is through destruction. And that's neoliberalism. All righty. How are the Italian Red Brigades different than the Shining Path? Well, the Shining Path, they had a base among the peasantry. They organized, indigenous folks, peasants in Peru, to seize liberated territories and such, right? Whereas the Italian Red Brigades, they were just, college kids who blew shit up. It was like the Weathermen or something. They were just college-age students who had a Maoist ideology and engaged in left adventurous terrorism. Whereas the Shining Path, they were very bloodthirsty and very violent, but they did seize areas. They did build up a base. They did train a peasant base of people to be loyal to them and such. They were a bit different than the Italian Red Brigades. Italy is a developed first world country. Would you be investing in Dogecoin? I've never heard of it, so I doubt it. So there you go. Notable success stories of BRI. Stories of BRI. All righty. So there you go. How is socialist democracy different than liberal democracy? Well, look, liberal democracy, liberal democracy, the feeling is that the popular will cannot change things like the military, right? In a liberal democracy, and they've spelled this out very blatantly. If you read stuff being published by the Council on Foreign Relations now, if you read stuff being published, this concept of democratic regression, it stops being a liberal democracy when society changes, right? When the nature of the military is changing. Read that Brezhnev wanted to expand private market. All right, that in a liberal democracy, you could elect a progressive socialist, but he couldn't change the way the military operates. He couldn't, change the way the military operates. You could elect a progressive socialist. He couldn't change the way the FBI operates. He couldn't change the way that the police operate, right? That in a liberal democracy, right, there's not any state ideology. There's no state ideology. The state has no goals other than to govern. The state has no agenda to carry out. There's no ideology. There's no mobilization of the public. Everyone just votes for the leaders they want. Those leaders abide by the Constitution, and everything stays exactly the same. And of course, liberal democracy is a facade because there is an ideology. It's called liberalism, right? That's the ideology. It's called liberalism. But liberalism is this non-ideology ideology. And the state is not supposed to have any goals, but it does have goals. That's why it's, constantly attacking countries. And that's why it's the goal of the state is to make profits for those who control it. Safeguard against corruption. Right? Right. So the state does have goals and it does have an agenda. It's not supposed to. It's just supposed to serve the people who voted for it, but it does. The state's not supposed to have an ideology, but it does. Anti-communism and imperialism and making profits for the super rich and liberalism. So, liberalism is a facade. Beneath it is the rule of capital. The capitalist ideology prevails, the capitalist goals prevail, and all of that. That's liberal democracy. Socialist democracy, the idea is that we will change the nature of the police, right? And we will, the policing agencies in a socialist society will be trained in socialist ideology, and they'll be understanding that their goal is to advance, socialism and the transition eventually to a stateless, classless world, right? The idea is that the military, again, will not just, won't be politically independent, but will be having ideology. Will be understanding that its goal is to defend socialism and to fight imperialism, and that socialist democracy and liberal democracy, the difference is liberal democracy pretends it has no ideology, but actually has the ideology of capitalism, whereas a socialist democracy would admit that it has an ideology and it would admit it's carrying out a goal, right? And that's the difference, right? Liberal democracy is a facade. Okay, I'm repeating myself. All righty. Oh boy. All right. Was the FARC an example of armed self-defense? At first it was. Okay? Right, 70s and 80s, 60s, the FARC, there was a military dictatorship in Colombia. They were, in the countryside, but you have to remember what happened. So in 1993, Colombia had elections. It had an elected government. And the FARC, the Communist Party, right? So the FARC started out as the armed wing of the Colombian Communist Party. But in 1993, the Colombian Communist Party voted to end armed struggle and join the government. And when that happened, the FARC cut ties and continued the armed struggle. And at that point, Cuba stopped giving support to the FARC, right? And at that point, the FARC, was basically most of the world communist movement stopped supporting the FARC. I think that was correct, right? That, look, Mao Zedong in the Little Red Book, he says the party must control the gun must never control the party. And if the FARC is the armed wing of the Colombian Communist Party, right? The Colombian Communist Party, there's a brutal military dictatorship. They're forced to flee from the cities and go to the countryside, organize underground. So the political party decides we have no choice. We have to develop an armed self-defense group. We're going to make the FARC. And then the situation in the country changes. And the Communist Party, the political party that's supposed to be in charge of the FARC, says, you know what? We don't want to engage in armed civil war. We want to engage in a peaceful transition to socialism. And then the armed group says, no, we're not going to do that. I'm sorry. No, not okay. No, I'm with Cuba. Cuba was absolutely right to cut off their support to the FARC post 1993. And if you read Fidel Castro's writings on the FARC, right? You read Fidel Castro's writings about the FARC, he says, look, when people have no choice and are fighting for their lives, that's one thing. But when armed struggle becomes a way of life, right? The FARC, they're not going to win. You think the FARC is going to win? You think the FARC is like tomorrow we're going to find out, Colombia was just seized by the FARC? Of course not, right? The FARC, armed struggle becomes a way of life, okay? It stops being about winning. You think the Naxals are going to win anytime soon? No, right? And when it stops being about actually winning and it becomes a way of life, pretty soon you degenerate into criminality, right? That's what happens, right? When the armed struggle, look, great example, not a very good example. Well, here's an example, right? You ever watch any old cowboy movies about Jesse James? Well, Jesse James was not a good guy. He was pro-Confederate. But why did Jesse James become an outlaw, right? Well, because he was a pro-Confederate insurgent after the U.S. Civil War was over, right? The U.S., and during the Civil War, he and his family members and relatives, they got their guns together and started attacking Union soldiers during the Civil War. Well, the Civil War ended. And when the Civil War ended, it was over. The Civil War was over. But Jesse James couldn't just go back to being a civilian again because he'd been assassinating and murdering Union soldiers, and he had not been officially part of the Confederacy, so it wasn't a war. He was actually a terrorist and a criminal, right? So he became an outlaw. And that's generally what happens. When armed struggle becomes a way of life, people go from being, being armed fighters, and they degenerate into criminals, right? Because they can't return to society. And that is why you cannot have armed struggle become a way of life. The Naxals, a lot of what they do in India is just criminal behavior. They rob people, okay? Rich people are traveling through the countryside. They rob them. They take their money, right? Are the Naxals, are they robbing them to come to power? No, they're robbing them because they can't go back to civilian life because they're criminals, right? Because they've engaged in armed struggle for the last 40 years. And that when armed struggle becomes a way of life, when these groups become armed, and they're just armed, right? It stops being a good thing. And Fidel Castro, that's what he said to the FARC. When the FARC terminated its relationship with the Communist Party of Colombia and just said, you know what, we're going to keep waging armed struggle. At that point, armed struggle had become a way of life. They weren't going to win. And that was a disaster. I'm really glad that peace treaty was signed, that most of the FARC has surrendered. You still have the dissident FARC. I'm glad that they've joined the government and that the Civil War is mostly over. Look, that was, the FARC. No, they should have, when Fidel Castro, when the Colombian Communist Party said end armed struggle, they should have ended armed struggle. When the road of peaceful transition was available, they should have taken it. And the gun must be controlled by the party. The party cannot be controlled by the gun. And again, armed struggle is not a way of life, right? It's something people do when they have no choice, when the road of peaceful transition is taken. And all of that, when people have absolutely no choice, they must engage in armed self-defense to protect themselves, and there's a chance they might actually. But this is no. The FARC. No, I don't approve. I don't approve. All right. Is the Republic of Korea a colony? Technically, no. Right? It's an independent country. I think you're more asking, is it economically independent? And at this point, it largely is. Right? Park Chung-hee. So after the Second World War, you had North and South Korea. The dictator of South Korea was Syngman Rhee. Syngman Rhee was the dictator of South Korea. The students brought him down in the April Revolution. There were protests all over, South Korea, where the students poured into the streets, and eventually Syngman Rhee was forced to step down. They had open elections for a while, and then Park Chung-hee became the dictator in the early 60s. Park Chung-hee was a little bit different than Syngman Rhee because Park Chung-hee made a deal with the Kennedy administration, and the Kennedy administration and the Johnson administration forced Japan to loan lots of money to Park Chung-hee. And the Park Chung-hee regime, did a lot of economic development, right? They built POSCO, which is the government-run steel industry. They built some car industries. A lot of the big companies from South Korea were built by the government of South Korea. In coordination, because the Park Chung-hee dictatorship, was a kind of a Bonapartist dictatorship. The USA needed South Korea to be stable, right? Because if not, North Korea is right there. Half the country's already socialist, so they didn't want a revolution. So the United States worked with the PARC regime to industrialize Korea, and that resulted in South Korea developing a level of economic independence. South Korea is not, South Korea is not Haiti. South Korea is not Guatemala. Okay. South Korea has its own industries. It has its own level of development. As brutal as PARC was a brutal dictator and murderer. He had a concentration camp for homeless children. You can look that up. But he industrialized the country. And that because of the Park Chung-hee Bonapartist regime, South Korea has a lot more of its own economic independence. That said, though, there's still lots of U.S. troops there. And there's been rioting against those U.S. troops. Many times the people of South Korea have poured into the streets against the U.S. troops. For a while, the daughter of the dictator Park was president. And now we have Moon Jae-in, who's a little less pro-U.S. And so it's a push and a pull. South Korea is much more economically independent than many countries that the USA aligns with, but it's occupied. It's still occupied. There's a huge U.S. military presence there, and so it's complicated. All right, Kshama Sawant and Socialist Alternative. Kshama Sawant is a member of the City Council in Seattle, and she's elected, but she's a member of a socialist organization called Socialist Alternative. Socialist Alternative are mainstream Trotskyites. Trotskyites divide into three categories. First, you have what you call neo-Trotskyites or third camp Trotskyites. They're new leftists. They say no socialist country, no country's ever been socialist before. They were all evil Stalinist regimes, blah, 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 blah. They're part of the new left. They're like anarchists and whatever, right? And they're on the college campuses. That's the International Socialist Tendency, IST, ISO. That's with China, Asian Tiger. The ISO, that's the Shachtman group. I think there's a group in Britain called Workers' Liberty. And these are new leftists. It's not anything that Trotsky said. This is just, they're against the Soviet Union. It wasn't democratic enough. They're for pure workers' democracy. It's never been created anywhere. This is ultra left stuff. Vosh would love those people. It's not Trotskyism. Okay. Then you have another category that I call orthodox Trotskyists. And these are people that are lunatics, that, they believe in space aliens. They believe World War II is still happening. They want to legalize pedophilia. And they live in this kind of alternate universe, the Spartacist League and the International Bolshevik Tendency and the Internationalist Group and the World Socialist website. And these people, they're like ultra Trotskyists, orthodox Trotskyists, and they live in this universe where there's the one true way that Trotsky did things, and they live in an alternate reality. Okay, they're fringe and they're crazy. All right, but then there's what you can call mainline Trotskyists. And mainline Trotskyists, generally, they are associated with labor unions. They really like labor unions. They kind of support socialist countries, but not really. They will maintain that socialist countries are deformed workers' states. They'll admit some good things about Cuba or Venezuela or the former Soviet Union. At the end of the day, they don't really support those countries, but they know they're not capitalist. They'll say that they're not capitalist. They're Stalinist regimes or whatever. And they're obsessed with labor unions. And that's Socialist Alternative. Socialist Alternative, they were part of the, they were in Britain. In Britain, you had the mainline Trotskyist current in Britain was called the Militant Tendency. And it was led by Ted Grant, and they were part of the Labour Party in Britain, and they were the Militant Tendency. And during the 1980s, they were actually elected. They ran the City Council of Liverpool, the Militant Tendency. Militant Tendency split, and one faction of the Militant Tendency stayed in the Labour Party. Another faction of the Militant Tendency broke with the Labour Party. Well, the section of the Militant Tendency that left the Labour Party and wanted to form a new socialist party outside of the Labour Party, those folks, they formed the Socialist Alternative, the international current that you can call Socialist Alternative. They broke with Ted Grant. Ted Grant's followers are the International Marxist Tendency. They're still in the British Labour Party. In the United States, they're called the Workers' International League, and the split from them is called Socialist Alternative. They're mainline Trotskyists, and they're, you know, compared to a lot of other Trotskyite currents, they have their shit together a little bit more. They were really involved in fast food forward in the fight for 15. They got Kshama Sawant elected to city council. They're not pro-China. They're very anti-China. You know, they certainly aren't with me on international issues, but they're very pro-labor, and they're the main thing that they seem to be dedicated to doing is trying to build activist groups that are supportive of the labor unions. That's kind of their strategy. And that's not a bad thing, right? I mean, nothing wrong with that. You know, Kshama Sawant has played a very progressive role in city council in Seattle. If Amazon was able to remove her, that would be a bad thing. So, you know, I've met her before. Nice lady. You know, she's a Trotskyite. I am not. But, you know, I respect her. She, you know, is a serious organizer and all of that. And again, you know, like, you know, I don't agree with Trotskyism. I vehemently agree with Trotsky. I vehemently disagree with Trotskyism. But that said, I can respect Kshama Sawant. You know, I can respect her. So there you go. And they are mainline Trotskyists, socialist alternative. All righty. Liberals backing decolonization. Well, again, this is cultural, right? Again, you know, they're not thinking about, you know, decolonization in the sense of imperialism and economics. They're thinking about it in cultural terms. They understand imperialism as a cultural thing. They don't understand the economics of imperialism. All right. Was the Cuban Revolution left adventurism? I would say it was not left adventurism, because Cuba was a brutal authoritarian dictatorship where people could not peacefully organize. Because there was a mass base of people who wanted to see the overthrow of Batista, and Fidel was a popular figure who was respected and was from, you know, he was a very, very wealthy person. He was from the Cuban ruling class, basically, but he loved his people and wanted to break them free from colonialism. There was a mass base, immediately there was a mass base of support for the popular democratic struggle against an authoritarian regime. So no, even though it started out small, it's not the same thing, right? Not the same thing at all, right? You know, in the context of an authoritarian regime, context of there being a mass base and people wanting independence, and totally different situation. All right. Buyer's remorse, Eastern Europe. Well, buyer's remorse is not the right word, because you have to remember in 1991, they took a vote on whether or not to dissolve the USSR. And the vote was overwhelmingly in favor of keeping the USSR. And in fact, the vote to keep the USSR was higher in the countries outside of Russia. Right, the countries in Eastern Europe that were not part, you know, that were you know, countries like Ukraine and Latvia and Lithuania, the vote was much higher to keep the USSR. So it wasn't buyer's remorse because they didn't buy it. And yes, in every one of those countries, they do poll after poll after poll, and anti-communist foundations talk about this. This is just reality. All the countries, polls say life was better with the USSR, right? I'm so tired of people saying to me, oh, haven't you ever met anyone who actually lived under it? Yes, I have, actually. And they do poll after poll after poll in the countries that actually had it, and people say life was better. But, you know, you never met any of those people because you're in the United States and you're meeting one group of people. All righty. All right, how do Bashar Assad's economics compare to his father's? Well, Bashar, you know, Hafez Assad in the 80s, you know, I mean, it was very much more the Soviet style. I mean, I believe you couldn't have a dollar. It was a serious crime to possess U.S. currency in Syria in the 70s. And it was far more along like the Soviet line. It's a completely state-run economy. Now, you know, under Bashar Assad, the Syrian economy is much closer to China. You know, it's much more of a, you know, it's a state-run economy, but there's a lot of private companies, there's a lot of foreign investment. You know, it's much more different, right? It's much less the Soviet style. Hafez Assad was much more in line with the Soviet style of development, which made sense with the way the world was at that time. Bashar Assad is much more in line with the Chinese style of development, again, which makes sense with the way the world is now, right? So there you go. I don't think it's about what two individuals wanted. I think it's about the changing world, right? The goal of any socialist society should be to make sure the population has what they need, raise living standards, you know, growth, you know, that's the goal. The goal is lots of growth. And so there you go. And thank you, Andre. Thank you very much. Thank you very, very much. All righty. How do you bring up communism in conversations about intersectionality and decolonization? Well, you know, that's a good question, right? I mean, it's a very good question because you don't want to attack, right? You don't want to attack and you don't want to be vicious. You don't want to tell people you're wrong. But you also want to make clear that communism and wokeism are not the same thing. I lived under it, says Andre. Very good. Very, very good. Communism and wokeism are not the same thing. Intersectionality, wokeism, and that stuff they preach on the campuses, that is not the same thing at all. Not the same thing at all as what William Z. Foster and Gus Hall pushed. I think the main thing would be to try to divert the conversation to an economic conversation, because the intersectionality, decolonization crowd, they don't know anything about economics. They don't care about economics. But if you can get them to care about economics, that starts to deconstruct some of the, wokeism that they've been taught. Because at the end of the day, the issue is economics, right? It's the capitalist drive to make profits at the expense of humanity, the falling rate of profit, the problem of overproduction, the general law of capitalist accumulation. All of this stuff is important, right? And they don't know anything about that. So divert it to economics. That's my advice. All right, success stories of the Belt and Road. There are so many. I mean, Brazil, how many hydroelectrical power plants did China build in Brazil that brought electricity to parts of the country that hadn't had it before in Brazil? Thailand, and you go throughout Southeast Asia, the airports, the hospitals that have been built. Africa, how many African countries have benefited from the Belt and Road? There are so many stories of the Belt and Road's success. I mean, many regions, Latin America, you can talk about, Southeast Asia, Africa. I mean, many parts of the world have really benefited from the Belt and Road. I have never heard this about Brezhnev wanting to expand private markets at the time of his death. That doesn't surprise me. The whole Soviet Union was saying in the 80s that they needed reform. The problem was the way they implemented the reform. It was very clear in the 80s they needed reform, right? They couldn't continue going the way they were going. It wasn't going to work. Okay. How do we safeguard against corruption? Well, I think the main thing is involving people in the political process. When people are involved in their community, involved in the political process, when the population is being mobilized to take part in decision-making, that is generally the best, check on corruption. Democratic participation, mobilization of the people. When the people are heavily involved in the political process, corruption is much less. But when the population is asleep and locked out of politics, that's when corruption can creep in. The struggle is always to keep people involved in politics. When the population is awake and involved, it becomes much harder for people to be corrupt. All righty. Would China just become an Asian tiger country if capitalism was restored? Well, I think if capitalism was restored, right? So, the restoration of capitalism in the USSR involved, a full-scale counter-revolution, the dismantling of the state-run economy. And that's what a counter-revolution is. In order for, the amount of turmoil to take place in China, to overthrow the Chinese Communist Party has a monopoly on political power and all of that. But imagine, that somehow there was so much upheaval and chaos in China that the Chinese Communist Party was brought down. If that happened, China wouldn't become an Asian tiger. It would become, it would fall apart economically. The amount of upheaval that would be required to bring down the Chinese Communist Party, the amount of instability and unrest, the amount of regional differences that already exist in China. We're not just talking about, Hong Kong and Tibet and Uyghurs. We're talking about, just between North China and South China. The Chinese Communist Party falling doesn't result in China just becoming Singapore. No, it results in mass chaos and death and instability and a lot of big problems. No, my friend, no. It's like, okay, we've just had a huge war and toppled the 90 million member political party that's run this country for 100 years. Oh, okay, all right. And then, no. It doesn't just, okay, we just become Singapore now. No. Not how it would work. The amount of instability and chaos and destruction that would have to be carried out to bring out the Chinese Communist Party would result in a mass economic catastrophe. There would be no. And the Asian tigers, you have to remember, were only allowed to exist because of the Cold War. They were only allowed to exist because the United States strategically, was going to allow them to develop as a barrier against communism. And then on top of that, the USA, you know, especially like Lee Kuan Yew in Singapore, it's pretty clear that there were many times that that Lee Kuan Yew and the Clinton administration in the 90s were not on the same page. Look, you remember, well, anyway, there were many incidents that happened, and Lee Kuan Yew and you know, in the late 1999, you had the fall of the Asian markets where they pulled out their money all at once. Do you remember this? Where the imperialists pulled out their money in a fell swoop and wrecked the economy caused big problems in the Asian markets, right? And that no. The Asian tigers came to exist because they exploited unique historical circumstances, and the imperialists are not necessarily happy with them, number one. And if the imperialists were able to get in there and completely overthrow the Chinese Communist Party, no, they wouldn't just say, oh, you can be Singapore now. Oh, no, the imperialists would come in there and they would want blood, like what they did with the fall of the Soviet Union. You know, that's what Gorbachev and all of them believed. Gorbachev and his wing of the Soviet Communist Party, they believed that the USA was their friend and was going to help them transition Russia to be Sweden, right? They thought that they could move away from Marxism, Leninism toward European-style social democracy. And that's what they were led to believe. Gorbachev and Yeltsin and those kind of people, they were under the impression that they would transition from Marxism, Leninism to Scandinavian social democracy. That's what they thought would happen. Did that happen? No. The fall of the USSR was very, very, very intense. And, you know, when you wreck and destabilize a country, no, that's not the result, right? And that, no, like, again, now I'm sure that the CIA would like a lot of Chinese people to believe, hey, if you overthrow the Chinese Communist Party, we'll let you become Singapore. But it wouldn't happen. I can tell you that. That's not how wars are fought. When wars are fought, generally the side that wins doesn't go, oh, very good, now the war's over, have a good life. No, right? Especially when there's an economic battle going on between two systems. There's two economic superpowers that are, bashing it out. Winner take all. Spoils to the victor go the spoils. Yeah, no. If the USA was able to overthrow the Chinese Communist Party, we would see a lot of economic devastation, right? And I would urge people, look, I'm sure there's people in China that are very frustrated and have frustrations with the political system there, and they're very justified in doing that. I'm sure there's plenty of things that are wrong, but think about what the U.S. imperialists want to do. Did the U.S. imperialists want to make life better? I don't think so. I really don't think so. Name one country where they've made life better. Right? Every one of these countries, former Soviet Union, did life get better after the fall of the Soviet Union? No. Did life get better in Libya? Did life get better in Iraq? Did life get better in Afghanistan? Did life get better in Honduras after they overthrew Zelaya? Did life get better in Haiti after they overthrew Aristide? Name one place, one single place where the U.S. imperialists have gone since World War II, since the end of World War II. Name one place that they've gone in and overthrown an anti-imperialist or socialist government, and life has gotten better. Name one. I can't think of a single one. There is not a single place where they have made life better. And that's why I really, really don't get why people keep falling for this. Because every time there's a war, oh, the people are being so oppressed, gotta go rescue them. They're just being so oppressed. And they rescue them, and life gets worse. Every time, every single time. So don't get fooled again. Don't get fooled again. That is my advice to you. Don't get fooled again. And on that note, folks, I am going to end this stream. Thank you. This was a little bit weird. I didn't have a prepared speech, and I was doing all kinds of stuff and distracted by a bunch of different things and arguing with somebody, and I don't know. But anyway, and testing the StreamYard and all of that. Thanks for being here. Next time I'll do it more the orthodox way. I might keep doing it on StreamYard, though. We'll see. But I'm going to end it now. So we'll end the way we always do. A new upsurge in the struggle against U.S. imperialism is now emerging throughout the world. Ever since World War II, U.S. imperialism and its followers have been continuously launching wars of aggression. But the people of various countries have been continuously waging revolutionary wars to defeat their aggression. While the danger of a new world war still exists, and the people of all countries must get prepared, revolution is the main trend in the world today. And while the danger of a new world war still exists, and the people of all countries must get prepared, revolution is the main trend in the world today. We need a government of action that will fight for working families. Fusion City now. Fusion City now. We need a government of action that will fight for working families. We need a government of action that will fight for working families. Fusion City now. Good night.